This is part two of the story series I began sharing, the same journey connected to what I wrote in November 11th, 2006. If you've been following along, here's the next piece. I'll start this the opposite of how many veterans try to. I didn't join the military because 9/11 turned me into some hyper-patriotic superhero who ran through town waving a flag. I joined for one reason: independence. Who wants to sit around waiting for life to start when you can go make it happen? I always heard older people say, if you get too big for your britches, you need to go be on your own. They were right. No one forced me. No one held my hand. I didn't join because I was pushed into it. I joined because it was an opportunity, a job, a place to sleep, food, direction, stability, purpose, and most importantly, a way out. The military is one of the few places where, if you're willing, you can build a life from nothing. Male, female, any race, you get your shot. You can join the Army up to age 35, the Air Force up to 39, and sometimes get a waiver beyond that. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Before the Army, I was a nerd, a kid who got bullied in junior high. I remember being grabbed by the neck by a guy twice my size, punched, harassed. The quiet kid nobody took seriously. But basic training strips all that away. Your identity, your vanity, your ego. You all become the same, a team. I enlisted in 1990, right before the Gulf War. I shipped through MEPS in Denver and went to Fort Leonard Wood for basic. Halfway through, the Gulf War kicked off. The first time I thought I might actually go to war. By the time I finished training, the war was over and the military was drawing down. Units were full or deployed. Everyone acted like we were invincible. The Gulf War only lasted 100 hours, so people thought combat was quick and clean. But behind that short war were 148 killed and 467 wounded. People who didn't get to celebrate the victory. Real heroes who stepped into harm's way. It doesn't take a hero to order men into battle. It takes a hero to be one of those men who goes into battle. General Norman Schwarzkopf. This was the beginning of my military life, my first steps into a world that would eventually lead me to November 11th, 2006. When the Gulf War ended, nobody knew exactly what was happening with Gulf War illness. Some guys complained about symptoms, and a lot of people compared it to the Agent Orange mess from Vietnam. Nobody had answers yet. And here's one thing I've learned. You always respect the veterans who came before you. They fought a harder battle to get benefits and recognition. The price of war is never just body counts. It's injuries, poisons, trauma, and a lifetime of fallout. And if you're a veteran, you learn quickly that you need people who've been through your kind of hell. Otherwise, you end up in two bad situations. Inferiority, talking to someone who has a worse story and feeling like your pain doesn't count. Superiority, talking to someone who hasn't seen anything and you can't relate. Someone always had it worse. The worst cases didn't come home. So yeah, rant over. Let me tell you about my first duty station. The day I graduated AIT and accidentally moved across the hall from my damn drill sergeant. I was chosen to stay at Fort Leonard Wood after AIT. Right after graduation, they marched us to battalion headquarters, the same building we'd been smoked in for weeks. They threw us in a TMP, issued us sheets, green or prison striped, and dropped us in our new rooms. It was graduation weekend, my first night as a free man. I went straight to the PX and bought jeans, a new shirt, and a Duke basketball jacket. I was ready. Didn't know where I was going, but I was going somewhere. No drill sergeants, no yelling, no bullshit. So at 19:30, dressed to kill and smelling like the cologne section at Walmart, I stepped out of my barracks room and froze. My AIT drill sergeant, the same one who smoked the soul out of my body, walked out of the room directly across the hall. I damn near shit my pants. He stared at me like I owed him money and said, "What the fuck are you doing here, Private?" I snapped into parade rest so fast my spine cracked. "I live here now, drill sergeant." He was still in uniform. I later understood why. Drill sergeants practically live at work. He looked at me, shook his head, and barked, "Get your ass in your room and be ready in 1 hour." I had no idea if I was about to die or get smoked into the carpet. 1 hour later, I was standing in the hallway at parade rest like an idiot. He walked out, laughed, and said, "Relax, I'm not your drill sergeant anymore. You're permanent party." Then he said, "Get in," and pointed at the nicest, loudest, most obnoxious sports car I'd ever seen. He drove me straight to the NCO club, paid my way in, handed me a Long Island iced tea, and said, "You don't go anywhere without me tonight." So I spent the night dancing with a light-skinned woman who looked like Gina from Martin and taught me the electric slide. Toward the end of the night, my drill sergeant said, "Looks like you're going home with somebody. I'm taking this one back to the barracks." So I left with her. Long story short, months later, I saw her pinning E7 rank on her husband at a battalion ceremony. So I had no idea she was married. Welcome to the Army. First duty section, the $1 million hole. We didn't have to show up to work until Tuesday because the battalion gave everyone a 4-day weekend after graduation. When I finally reported, a TMP drove us to our section, the $1 million hole, where they trained all the 12 F trainees. My first supervisor was SFC Burton, and the man was a machine. Former drill sergeant, feet on the desk, eyes that could cut through concrete, all business. The first day, we walked in and instantly got smoked. No warm-up, no welcome, just pain. He had 19 vehicles under his responsibility and ran Ace Week like a tyrant, and I respected the hell out of him. Rumor had it his wife had gotten pregnant by another man while he was on the trail as a drill sergeant. Sadly, I believed it. Drill sergeants never come home. But he was one of the great ones, a leader you could look up to. I remember the first time I met my first wife and her sister. They were both beautiful. The kind of women who made soldiers suddenly volunteer for things like pizza parties just to be near them. They ran these events for the Post, and every guy noticed them. Anita was aggressive. Tua wasn't. So naturally, shy little me aimed for the quiet one, which pissed Anita off instantly. I asked Anita about Tua anyway, because subtlety wasn't one of my spiritual gifts at the time. She looked annoyed, but she told me, and that was that. I asked Tua to the movies, and she actually picked me up in an old station wagon, and we went to see Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Total 90s classic. She had a baby already, and he was beautiful. I fell in love with both of them immediately, the kind of love that hits you like a surprise punch you don't see coming. A week later, she brought herself and the baby to the barracks. We made love for the first time right there, my roommate on the other side of the wall lockers, pretending he couldn't hear anything. And then, a week after that, I was peeing fire. I panicked, marched myself to SFC Burton like a puppy with its tail between its legs, and asked for a sick call slip. I was embarrassed, but I told him what happened. He didn't judge. He just handed me the slip and did that little smirk NCOs do when they know you're about to get humbled by life. Next thing I know, I'm at the hospital with a nurse shoving a Q-tip the length of a pool cue straight down the barrel to take a sample. Came back positive. Chlamydia. Great. Since Tua was the only person I'd been with, I told her she gave it to me. She admitted she'd been with a drill sergeant from the pizza parties, so now everybody at work knew. Every mechanic, every NCO, every soldier in earshot. The rumor mill at Fort Leonard Wood didn't run on diesel, it ran on chlamydia stories. There had been whispers about her and her sister for a while. I just didn't care. She was young, 17, and I genuinely thought she was innocent. And somehow, despite all this chaos, 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. Her parents forced her into the marriage. She didn't look excited, not in the pictures, not during the planning, not even on the day. She once told me her mother had tried to push her into marriages before. Only she really knows how she felt, but to me, something always seemed off. But back then, Fort Leonard Wood wasn't exactly bursting with single women. Guys had to drive all the way to St. Louis just to meet someone. They didn't call it Fort Lost in the Woods for nothing. When me and Tua moved in together, it was in a place called Evening Shade on the south side of Post. Our neighbor was a woman whose daughter had been raped and murdered by MPs on the back gate road, a grim reminder that even in quiet, rural Missouri, darkness could find you. Out there, the land was empty, quiet, perfect for fishing. I loved catfishing. Simple, peaceful, no effort required. I once found a dead giant turtle on a river bend, and that thing was attracting channel cats like a Vegas buffet. Must have been 20 of them circling the area. Nobody else was ever out there. It felt like my own private world. I took Tua and baby Sean out there with me, and every time I went fishing, I strapped Sean to my chest in one of those baby carriers. Imagine a soldier standing on a riverbank wrestling a catfish while a baby sits there like a commander observing the mission. That was us. One day, I caught this huge smallmouth bass, dragged it into shore, set Sean down for 1 second to get the pliers, and that little guy crawled right over to the bass and started petting it. That's the day I realized. That fish was his spirit animal. He was born a fisherman. When the Army began its post-Gulf War drawdown, there weren't enough NCOs to fill the leadership positions. That's how I ended up as an E4, a specialist, running a section that should have belonged to an E6. I was responsible for maintaining 19 M9 armored combat earth movers and supervising 2 soldiers, including a guy named Aarons, who would later become a first sergeant. Even as a junior soldier, I was operating at a level way above my rank. When I finally went to the promotion board, everybody in the battalion knew who I was, not because I was special, but because I carried the weight of a much higher billet. I had studied for months expecting to be grilled with questions. Instead, the CSM asked me only one thing. "What slot are you holding?" I answered honestly, "An E6 slot, Sergeant Major." He just nodded and said, "I don't have any questions." I walked out, stunned. Shortly after that, I was promoted to sergeant, E5, before my 21st birthday. Back then, getting promoted wasn't easy. It was the era when E5s in their mid-30s were common because the Army wasn't handing out stripes like candy. And this was the old school Army. You earned your stripes, literally. At the promotion ceremony, I got blood striped and there was no mercy. I felt every hit. Blood ran down both sides of my BDUs, and my leader's book was placed in my hands like a rite of passage. Everyone else celebrated at the NCO club with drinks. I celebrated with a glass of milk, since I wasn't old enough to legally drink. The whole room cracked up, a brand new sergeant toasting with dairy. Later, I had the privilege of working in the 12F BNCOC course, contributing to the training of future leaders. It was the first time I realized I wasn't just becoming a soldier, I was becoming part of the chain that shaped soldiers. During that era, country music wasn't what it is today. Rock, classic rock, and heavy metal dominated the barracks. Country felt old-fashioned, something from our parents' generation. Then came Garth Brooks, who changed everything by bringing rock show energy to country music. He made it cool again and revived the whole genre. Suddenly, everyone had boots, hats, and a reason to line dance. Those were the times that defined the early part of my career. A young sergeant, too young to drink, leading soldiers older than me, earning respect the hard way, growing up fast, and learning what service really meant. After my first duty station, I headed to Bamberg, Germany, assigned to the 82nd Engineer Battalion, Blue Babe. Germany was incredible, but housing was tight, so I couldn't bring my family for the first 6 months. It was my first experience truly living alone overseas. My room was smaller than a walk-in closet, a bed, a wall locker, and just enough space to turn around. The next morning, I was marched into the 1SG's office. He was a massive guy, standing rigid with his hands behind his back. When I reached out to shake his hand, he extended what looked like a mechanical claw. I had no idea he was missing an arm. He lost it during a training accident when a cratering charge exploded. But despite that injury, he was one of the toughest leaders I ever served with. He did PT every day and could out-push up half the NCOs in the company. He joked openly about his wife leaving him for another woman, which shocked me because I had never even met someone openly gay at that point in my life. That weekend, I went out with a few soldiers to a club in downtown Bamberg called the Green Goose. And there was my 1SG, Same guy, different world, dressed sharp, wearing a realistic prosthetic arm instead of the claw. We used to call him Robotop because of how he switched between the two. I spent the night dancing, having fun, and eventually got left behind at the bar. This happened a lot in Germany. You always shared a cab because it was cheaper, and you never knew who would end up in it. That night, my cab had two guys and a woman whose husband was in the field. She literally told them they couldn't take her home. She'd have to go back with them to the barracks. And right there in the cab, she was messing around with both of them. When we got dropped off at the gate, they went one way and I went another, alone, walking back to my tiny room wondering what I had just witnessed. It made me think about home, about my wife, and about how dangerous the military lifestyle can be on a marriage. Phones were expensive. There was no internet, no social media. Communication was limited to short, costly phone calls. And the truth is this: if you want a marriage to survive the military, get rooted in a church or community. Otherwise, temptation eats people alive. In the military, especially overseas, infidelity is everywhere. Young women, thousands of men, isolation, loneliness. It's a recipe for trouble. And Germany was the place I learned that firsthand. When the guys from the barracks took me to the NCO club in Bamberg, I thought it would just be a distraction, a night to feel less alone in a place where everything felt foreign. They showed up in cowboy hats and boots, the kind of southern comfort they carried with them everywhere. Tim McGraw's Don't Take the Girl had just come out that year, and for a brief moment it felt like home. But the atmosphere in that club was strange. It was full of American women whose husbands were gone with the artillery unit training in the field. The loneliness in that room had its own gravity, and the choices people made inside it didn't match the beliefs I'd built my life around. Watching it unfold, I suddenly felt the ground shift under me. I kept thinking, if this is what happens when people are lonely, what's happening back home? That was the night something cracked in me. It was the night I began doubting the idea of loyalty, not just from others, but the entire structure I built my sense of safety on. At Fort Leonard Wood, everything had been simple. I went to church basketball on Thursday nights. I was around my wife and her family. I trusted the world I lived in. In Bamberg, that trust felt naive. As the days passed, the rumors made it worse. The guys told stories about what happened back home, stories they shouldn't have known, stories they probably exaggerated, but stories that landed on me like facts. Rumors about my wife, rumors about her sister, rumors that hit exactly where my insecurities already lived. And when you're far from home, rumors don't stay rumors. They become replacements for truth. Loneliness is its own kind of pressure. It pushes you into situations you never imagined you'd be in. I found myself drifting, to clubs in Nuremberg, to conversations with strangers, to moments where the isolation and the need to feel something other than fear took over. Every time I crossed a moral line, I felt the same thing, a mixture of guilt and numbness. It was like watching myself from the outside. And what hit hardest was discovering that the loneliness didn't just belong to the soldiers. It belonged to the women passing through Germany too, whether they were military spouses, German locals, or college students on exchange programs. Everyone was coping with emptiness in their own way. Everyone carried some private ache. And somehow, all those aches collided in the same places: clubs, bars, barracks rooms. People coping the only way they knew how. When the college women from San Diego moved into the barracks next to the engineer company, the one SG warned us to leave them alone. He spoke with the authority of a man who'd seen too much. But warnings don't stop the inevitable. Loneliness doesn't respect rank. What struck me most wasn't what happened. It was the effect it had on my thinking. I began to see relationships differently. I began to question everything I had been raised to believe about fidelity, marriage, and the idealized image of a military spouse waiting patiently back home. You grow up watching movies of women in sundresses tending to their kids, tying ribbons around oak trees. But the reality I was seeing, in Germany, in the barracks, in the clubs, was nothing like the fantasy. My worldview didn't shatter all at once. It eroded. One story here, one rumor there, one lonely night, one moment of guilt, another night of doubt. I wasn't losing faith in my marriage. I was losing faith in the entire idea of monogamy. I was losing faith in people, in myself. I kept wondering if my expectations were unrealistic, or if the world was simply more broken than I ever realized. I didn't know it then, but what I was going through had a name: betrayal trauma. Not because someone had betrayed me, but because my beliefs had. I was experiencing the psychological freefall that happens when the system of trust you built your identity on no longer fits what you're seeing with your own eyes. I coped the way young soldiers often cope, by distancing myself from the pain, by rationalizing my choices, by pretending none of it mattered. But it did matter, deeply. It changed the way I saw relationships. It changed the way I saw myself. It changed how I interpreted every interaction with women for years. I'm older now, and I understand things I didn't back then. People are complex. Loneliness is dangerous. Rumors are poison. And judging anyone, including myself, through the filter of those years is unfair. But back then, standing in those German barracks, hearing country music through the walls, surrounded by soldiers and strangers coping with their own battles, it felt like the world I believed in no longer existed. And that feeling stayed with me for a long time. My tour in Germany changed once Tua and the kids arrived. Having them close gave me a sense of grounding I hadn't felt since leaving the States, but it also forced every fear and suspicion to the surface. The arguments weren't loud or frequent, but they carried weight. One day she admitted she had cheated while I was gone. After everything I'd witnessed in Bamberg, the infidelity, the loneliness, the way people fell apart when left alone too long, her confession hit like a confirmation of my worst fears. But what do you do when you have a family? You keep going. We had 2 beautiful kids, and despite the pain, I still cared deeply for her. My focus turned toward holding everything together: the marriage, the kids, my career, and whatever was left of myself. Around that same time, my life took a sharp turn professionally. At just 21, I was made the A&O platoon sergeant, an E5 leading a platoon 2 ranks above my pay grade. One S.G. Rowland, my one-armed first sergeant, insisted I take the position. Our platoon sergeant had lost his wife in a plane crash and left Germany suddenly. The CSM, a hard man forged in Vietnam, backed Rowland up. They pushed me into leadership before I thought I was ready, but they believed in me. And leadership came fast. My first weekend with a new soldier, a former battalion commander's driver, he got a DUI. I'd never had anyone in my section get in trouble. The CSM called me in and told me, "That DUI is your fault." I was confused. "Top, I just got this guy from you." He wasn't talking about blame. He was talking about responsibility. He explained that when soldiers fall apart, it's usually because their leaders aren't paying attention. That officers protect their own, but enlisted leaders have to protect each other, all the time, on or off the clock. He told me weak leaders hide behind UCMJ. Strong leaders mentor, correct, and guide. That talk shaped the rest of my career. I never issued a single Article 15 during my entire time in service. Not one. But when it came time for my NCOER, everything shifted. Some people were jealous, and eventually they complained enough that they got what they wanted. I didn't get an NCOER for those 6 months of work, but instead they had the incoming E7 put it on my next NCOER. I was excited because, as a young NCO, I really thought I would get that NCOER. Not that it would have changed anything, but it was just my own foolish pride. When I confronted the CSM about how unfair it was, he said they couldn't rate me 2 slots above my rank without it looking bad that I was moved back. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was just easier for them to give in to the complainers. Either way, that moment taught me something. Some people will do anything to avoid responsibility, and some will tear down anyone who proves it can be done. We ended up having a house fire in our apartment, set accidentally by my oldest son, Sean/Paipega. The base apartment still had gas stoves in the early 90s, and you needed a lighter in case the pilot went out. I bought a child-proof lighter and kept it above the stove, but Sean was resourceful. He dragged a chair over, climbed up, and grabbed it. At some point, he walked into the room he shared with Abriana and ignited his bedsheets. I woke up that Saturday morning to the sound of a fire alarm. When I walked into the living room, Sean was calmly watching cartoons like nothing had happened. I checked the kitchen, no fire. Then I heard Abriana screaming. Without thinking, I opened the kids' room door. A wave of heat and smoke hit me like a wall. The room was a blur of flames, and I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear her. I ran in blindly, feeling for where she should be, searching the bed until I found her curled up in a tight ball, terrified. I grabbed her, ran out with my family, and yelled, "Fire!" down the hallway while we evacuated the building. Neighbors from downstairs ran up with fire extinguishers to help, but the fire was already too big for a couple of handheld extinguishers. They backed out immediately, and the fire department arrived shortly after to put it out. A few weeks later, the unit held an awards ceremony. To my shock, the same two E7s who ran up with extinguishers had put themselves in for awards for saving my family. I sat there in formation, my hair singed off, still shaken from the fire, watching them get recognized for something they never did. My family was already out of the building before they arrived. They didn't save anyone. They didn't enter the room. They didn't even put the fire out. They did call the fire department, and I'll always give them credit for that. But the truth is simple. They weren't the heroes that day. They just knew how to write the paperwork. Meanwhile, I was just a 21-year-old E5 trying to move my family into a new apartment, replace everything we lost, and survive a fire investigation while being completely broke. We didn't have renter's insurance. I didn't even know we needed it in government housing. One wrong detail in that investigation, and I would have been financially ruined for damage caused by a scared little boy who didn't understand what he was doing. That award ceremony taught me something I never forgot. When leaders chase awards for themselves, enlisted soldiers lose trust in leadership. Not because awards exist, but because everyone sees the truth, even if nobody says it out loud. Those two E7s walked away with certificates. I walked away understanding that the wrong people often get the credit simply because they're the ones willing to ask for it. Later in my career, that lesson stayed with me. I never forgot how it felt to sit in formation and watch senior leaders get recognized for work they didn't do. I decided I would never become the kind of leader who used rank to elevate myself. The reality is simple. If not for the sacrifices of younger soldiers, senior leaders wouldn't have anything to put their name on. Years later, when I was standing outside my burnt apartment with nothing left, two unexpected figures showed up. Not soldiers, not leaders, not anyone from my chain of command. They were the Mormon missionaries. On that military base in Germany, where there were only a handful of them in the entire city, they showed up because that's what they believed they were called to do. The Army's mission is to defend the nation. The church's mission is you. If you want people who care about your family without obligation, without rank, without an award attached to it, you look for faith-based community. In that moment, with everything burned, no money, no home, and no recognition for what I had actually done, I learned the difference between people who show up for credit and people who show up because it's who they are. Military life pulls families in two directions at once. Leaders talk about taking care of soldiers and families. But when the mission ramps up, the truth is simple. Your personal life becomes something you're expected to manage quietly while still showing up fully for the Army. That was the world Toa and I were navigating in Germany. I was gone constantly. Field exercises, missions, maintenance cycles, trying to prove myself as a young NCO. She was raising 3 kids alone in a foreign country with no family, no cultural support, and no real community. People forget that when a soldier deploys, a spouse deploys too. The loneliness, the isolation, the pressure to appear strong, it all fell on her shoulders long before our worst day ever arrived. During a field exercise in Hohenfels, Toa went into labor, and the commander insisted I be released. That was the day our son, Eddie Van Havens, was born. We didn't have a name chosen, so I named him after Van Halen. He was beautiful. For a moment, we believed life was finally settling into something stable. Our girls were big sisters, and we were becoming the Samoan family we'd always pictured. But the Army never gives you long to breathe. Shortly after his birth, I was sent on repeated missions to the Netherlands to inspect bridges. I kept getting chosen because I could do the work unsupervised, but it meant I was gone more than anyone else. Right before one final mission, I complained about being the only NCO constantly tasked. They told me it would be my last trip. Then everything changed in a single moment. SGT Moore received a phone call. I saw the look on his face before he spoke. My son had passed away. I collapsed and cried right on the spot. Nothing in my life had ever broken me like that moment. When I returned to Bamberg, Toa was devastated. She had been alone through every challenge: the fire 7 months earlier, raising the kids, handling everything while I was gone again, and now she was facing the worst pain a mother can endure. At the hospital, I had to identify my son's body. His skin was blue, his head turned to the side, lifeless. I was overwhelmed by guilt. I had spent so much time on missions, and now time was gone. The hospital asked about an autopsy, but I refused. Toa had suffered enough. I wanted him left in peace. We sent his body back to Fort Leonard Wood, and I brought Toa home. She didn't need Germany anymore. She needed comfort, family, and space to breathe. But even in the middle of her grief, rumors and gossip surrounded us. A soldier across the hall, someone who lived a lifestyle that had nothing to do with morality, spread disgusting comments about her. She didn't deserve that. She needed compassion, not judgment. We buried our son in Missouri. But grief doesn't operate on a timeline, and I knew she needed more time. I signed in at Fort Leonard Wood and requested a compassionate reassignment. Germany didn't want to release me, not because they didn't understand our loss, but because I did my job well. Being reliable often means being used more than anyone else. For 3 months, I fought to stay home, but I eventually lost that battle and we returned to Germany. I didn't want to leave her behind again. The distance, the grief, and the isolation had already taken a toll on our marriage. If we had stayed in Missouri, maybe things would have been different. But the longer she was away from her own family and culture, the harder everything became. And when I returned to the unit, some soldiers made cruel comments. "Did you enjoy your vacation?" They didn't understand, and I cared too much about their opinions. So I worked harder and stayed later, trying to outwork my grief. The truth is, we were both hurting. I was gone too much, she was alone too much, and the time we lost with our children hurt both of us in ways we didn't understand back then. But through it all, Toa carried the heaviest weight a mother can carry. And even though our marriage eventually broke under the strain, I will always see her through the lens of that moment. A young mother far from home, grieving a child, doing her best in a world that offered her very little support. That loss changed everything, for both of us. Bosnia was my first real deployment, the kind of mission young soldiers imagine when they talk about seeing the world or doing something that matters. Except when we got there, it was clear we had arrived in a place where the world had already cracked open. Villages were abandoned, bridges destroyed. The air carried a sense of something recently broken. My platoon sergeant, SFC Wilshire, was a topographical engineer by trade, a map guy thrown into a world of armored vehicles and minefields. But he adapted fast. He was steady, thoughtful, and the kind of leader who didn't pretend to know everything. He learned our equipment alongside us and never acted above the task. Because of that, he earned my respect early. I was an E5 CEV commander then, responsible for a Panther, a remotely operated M60 tank hull engineered for mine clearing. I had a strong crew, disciplined and smart, and together we operated a machine designed to do one thing: roll over landmines so that other soldiers didn't have to. 2 weeks before the deployment, I had broken my right ankle. The unit wanted to keep me behind, but I wasn't having it. I cut off my own cast. I didn't join the army to stay home, and I wasn't going to let my crew deploy without me. That decision ended up shaping everything that came after. Bosnia taught me that war isn't just fought in firefights. Sometimes it's fought in the quiet spaces between explosions, in minefields, on broken bridges, and in the daily choice to protect people you'll never meet again. Our role as combat engineers put us at the center of that reality, and working alongside EOD, made the contrast between our jobs and the evolution of war itself impossible to ignore. During Bosnia, EOD accompanied us on mine lift missions, but their role was limited. They rarely left their trucks unless we encountered unexploded ordnance. Engineers were the ones walking the ground, marking lanes, clearing routes, and lifting mines by hand. Mobility and counter-mobility were our domain, the tasks no one outside the engineer corps really understands. If a force needed to move, we got them there. If an enemy needed to be slowed or stopped, we handled that too. It was simple, and in Bosnia, simplicity kept people alive. All of that would change in Iraq and Afghanistan. As EODs became the signature weapon of those wars, EOD started retrieving devices and components for intelligence analysis. The intent was to learn enemy patterns, but it came at a high cost. EOD techs went from being ordnance specialists to frontline targets, deploying robot after robot, walking long stretches of road, and sometimes paying with their lives. Looking back, I still question whether the intelligence gained justified the frequency with which we put them in danger. Some analysis is valuable, some comes at too high a price. Maybe future leaders will reevaluate when intel truly outweighs human life. War changes, but the question of how much we should ask of one soldier never goes away. Meanwhile, Bosnia reminded us that not every mission involved danger. Many involved healing. Our days were split between clearing mines that could kill children and building Bailey bridges so farmers could reach markets and workers could travel to their jobs. It was rebuilding a country one small piece at a time. But even humanitarian work had its strange moments. Farmers would steal bridge parts to repair their equipment or replace missing pieces on their land, and we'd have to weld the sections together just to keep the infrastructure intact. Everyone was just trying to survive in their own way. Guard duty gave us brief windows into normal life. The locals working the dining facility, the families passing by, young women living the ordinary lives that war hadn't fully taken from them. It was a reminder that even in a place ripped apart by violence, there were still pieces of life stitched into the landscape. Bosnia wasn't just death and danger. It was resilience, rebuilding, and the stubborn human instinct to keep moving forward. Clearing mines so children could walk safely, building bridges so communities could function, and debating the risks we placed on EOD, all of it forced me to confront the human cost of war in ways I never expected. Combat made me a soldier. Bosnia made me understand what soldiers are actually for. For all the danger in Bosnia, the minefields, the uncertainty, the long missions that pushed us to our limits, the hardest part wasn't enemy action. It was the distance between me and my kids. That ache lived under every mission brief, every patrol, every night spent staring up at a foreign sky. 2 songs carried me through the deployment. For my oldest daughter, it was "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing." It wasn't just a love song. It was the soundtrack of a father who knew he was missing birthdays, stories, scraped knees, hugs, all the little moments that stitch a childhood together. For my younger daughter, it was "Butterfly Kisses." That one hit deeper. It reminded me of innocence, beauty, and how fragile time really is. Contrary to what movies show, most soldiers aren't adrenaline junkies or glory seekers. A lot of us, me included, went to dangerous places for one reason, so our kids wouldn't grow up in poverty. Bosnia wasn't about heroism, it was about responsibility. Every mine we rolled, every bridge we built, every night in the cold was a payment toward giving my children a better life than the one I came from. I wasn't saving the planet, I was trying to save my family's future. But danger has a way of finding you even when your heart is somewhere else. One of our most intense missions was clearing a route to a crashed Hind D helicopter and retrieving a downed Black Hawk door. It was the first time I ever rolled a live minefield, the moment when all the training, all the rehearsals had to become instinct. My crew performed flawlessly. Every roller turn, every lane marking, every radio call mattered. When it was over, we received a 3-star general's coin from the commander of the 82nd Airborne. It was one of the proudest moments of my military career because the recognition came from surviving something that could have easily taken any of us. And then, after months of danger and distance, came the homecoming. When we redeployed to Germany, families filled the lot outside the buses. Some soldiers sprinted into the arms of people who had been waiting months just to hold them. I stepped off the bus and walked right through the crowd. No one recognized me at first. My face was thinner, my body worn down, my uniform dirt-stained. But then I saw a blur break from the mass of people. Little feet pounding the ground, arms wide. It was Valerie, only 3 years old, but she knew me instantly. That hug, small arms tightening around my neck with absolute trust. That alone made every danger, every cold night, every mine we rolled worth it. Not long after, we began disassembling the CEV tanks. Ours was one of the last CEV crews in the entire US Army. Watching that machine, the same one that protected us through minefields and missions, get stripped down felt like closing a chapter in Army history. But it also felt like closing a chapter in my own life. The CEV had been more than metal. It had been a shield, a home, a responsibility, and a proving ground. Saying goodbye to it was like saying goodbye to the version of me that had grown up inside it. Bosnia changed me. It made me a better soldier. It forced me to think deeper about war, extremism, and the cycles of violence that outlive generations. But above all, it reminded me that behind every mission, every deployment, every moment of danger, there is a family waiting, hoping for their soldier to return home. And sometimes that hope is the only thing that carries you through the darkest places on earth. Leaving Germany felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Our next duty station was Fort Hood, and I had already arranged to rent a house from a buddy named Gary Rakowski, whose marriage had collapsed while we were deployed. His wife had left him for an E7 on stayback, another reminder of the infidelity that seemed to haunt military families. By the time we arrived in Texas, I was convinced I needed to leave the Army and focus on keeping my own family together. I had 2 years left, and the plan was simple: finish my contract, move back to Missouri, and give my kids a stable life. That Christmas in Missouri reminded me of everything I loved: the Samoan dishes, the family energy, the feeling of home around a crowded table. I left Tua and the kids there while I went back to Fort Hood to finish my time. I was preparing to out-process when the Army offered me a reenlistment bonus. I called Tua's father for advice, and in his thick Samoan accent he said, "You better reenlist." So I did. I sent for Tua and the kids, bought new furniture to replace what we lost in the apartment fire, and soon after received orders to Fort Riley. The move to Kansas was rough. I tried to save money by moving us myself, a mistake I would never repeat. The housing waitlist at Fort Riley was over a year long, so I bought an old house in Ogden and decided to put down roots. Fort Riley had a reputation as the KKK tour, Kansas, Korea, Kansas, because many soldiers never seemed to leave. It felt like a place people got stuck, and I didn't want that to be us, but I also didn't fight it. I poured myself into work. Despite the challenges, I made E6, went to BNCOC, and led a squad that won the skills portion of Sapper Stakes. We didn't win the Ruck March because a last-minute soldier in jump boots fell out after we trained for months. Instead of blaming him, we carried his ruck and pushed through as a team. That experience taught me more about leadership than winning ever could. Sometimes your job is to carry someone else's load so the team can finish together. Fort Riley also gave me a sobering mission: funeral details across Kansas, Nebraska, and western Missouri. We performed hundreds of ceremonies, many for older World War II veterans who had no family left to stand for them. It was heartbreaking, but it showed me something important. No one cares about veterans more than other veterans. Civilians move on, families move on, but the military always remembers its own. Our platoon later headed to JRTC to train with the light infantry from Fort Campbell. I even ran into an old friend, SSG Hinkle. My OC, Sekefsef Riley, was one of the best I'd ever worked with. Our squad was chosen to put in the live minefield during the rotation. I ended up helping a young LT rewrite the minefield record, because the rows were misaligned and all the safety pins had been buried under a live mine. It was dangerous, tedious work, the kind of mission where you either do it right or someone dies. Later, when other squads messed theirs up, we were sent to fix their mistakes. My driver told me, "No good deed goes unpunished, SSG Havens." He wasn't wrong, but doing the right thing mattered more than getting credit. Through all of this, my relationship with Tua stayed shaky but respectful. We didn't fight much. We simply drifted under the weight of distance, insecurity, and the demands of military life. She worked at the Foot Locker warehouse, and I worried she might have someone else there. Fears rooted in everything I'd seen and heard over the years. I never had proof, just insecurity and the sense that the Army kept pulling us farther apart. By this point, I understood something clearly. Military kids have everything they need, but they pay for it with time away from their parents. And spouses live with sacrifices most people never see. It was 2001, and our company at Fort Riley was split in two. Half the unit was already at the National Training Center in California, gearing up for the kind of full-scale exercise that defined pre-war Army life. The rest of us were packing gear, tightening straps, checking rucks, drinking burnt motor pool coffee, and preparing to fly out and join them. I woke up before dawn, like every other soldier ready to move out. My gear was stacked, staged, and squared away. Helmet on top, ruck leaning against the wall, everything perfectly aligned like a decade of muscle memory demanded. Then the phone rang. A muster alert. Immediate recall to the company. I remember thinking it had to be a roster check or a last-minute manifest update. But when I arrived, the atmosphere was different. Quiet. Tight. No one joking around. Leaders stood in small clusters, their expressions sharp, not annoyed, concerned. Something was wrong. Then the briefing came. A terrorist attack. The United States under assault. Commercial flights grounded nationwide. It didn't feel real at first. It felt like someone describing a movie plot. Hijacked planes, burning towers, an attack on the Pentagon, another plane taken down by passengers who refused to be victims. But the faces around us said everything. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a training scenario. This was war, and it had started on our soil. The room went silent in a way I'd never heard before. Not fearful, but focused. Every soldier there knew instinctively that the world we woke up in that morning was gone. Everything we trained for, everything we studied, everything we had mentally prepared for as hypothetical, was now coming. And deep down, we knew. Nothing about military life would ever be the same again. For years, terrorism felt like a distant issue, something happening in embassies overseas, in markets in the Middle East, in alleyways of far-off cities. Many Americans didn't see the threat as real because it didn't reach them directly. But extremists had been attacking for decades. They had long believed it was their divine duty to destroy Western culture, to eradicate Israel, to strike American influence wherever it could be reached, and to reshape the world in the image of their ideology. Not all Muslims believed this, not even a fraction. But those who did, the extremists, were driven by a belief system twisted and weaponized into something violent, relentless, and uncompromising. They took religion, the thing meant to elevate and heal, and forged it into a tool to justify killing. And on that morning in 2001, they hit us in a way that forced the entire nation to confront something soldiers already knew. Evil doesn't stop because we ignore it. It doesn't slow down because we hope it will. It must be contained, confronted, and kept at a distance, or it will keep coming until it reaches our doorstep again. Standing in formation that day, I realized that everything I assumed about my career was about to change. The Army I served in before 9/11 was gone. The missions ahead were no longer field exercises, rotations, or peacekeeping operations. This was the beginning of a global fight that would shape the next 2 decades of American history and define the rest of my military career.